Oh, okay, we're good. Excellent. So I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to start or you wanted me to start. But first, I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined. If you've got friends, shoot them a note, tell them to jump online. This is our inaugural Object-ive Histories, and I tried to emphasize there. But what we're doing with this series that we're going to be running a couple more times through the summer is we're going to be looking at the storytelling mechanism that Nghi Vo uses in her book, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which is to take common everyday objects. I guess if you're an empress, they tend to be a little fancier than our common everyday objects, but to take common everyday objects and to relate the story of this character that we never meet. We only ever hear of her through the tales of her loyal, I guess, servant. That's a terrible way of talking about a person. But I think rabbit, handmaid, right? I mean, let's be honest, it was her close confidant. That's who this woman actually was. So Rabbit, the character of Rabbit, right, is an older woman who served the Empress for a long time and really knows the intimate history of the Empress, her rise to power, her early life, the travels that she went on, and all of sort of the different ways that she was involved in sort of her own myth making. And the story of this woman comes out in bits and pieces as Rabbit and the other character of the cleric find these objects throughout the Empress's household. And so we thought it would be interesting to kind of delve a little bit deeper into the idea of history through objects, right? History through physical, tangible things that we find in our homes that are created perhaps for a very basic reason, right? A piece of clothing, a piece of pottery, something like that, but that tells a larger story or somehow places an individual and their story into perhaps the larger historical picture where they were never in before. And so this is particularly important for groups of people that are historically underrepresented or missing in the official narrative. But it's also really important to remember that sometimes there are omissions in the official histories that come out, after a person has passed away, and they are no longer able to kind of hide their history, right? Or maybe they no longer care to hide their history. So we thought that would be kind of a fun way to explore what's going on in our own households and what might we have as part of our own personal history that kind of brings us a little bit more in line with a larger story. So I decided to do the first one. I have a couple of items. I have a couple of items because I wasn't sure how long, one item I'd be able to talk about. So I brought a couple of items, and Sarah is going to hopefully keep me on track. And ask me some poignant questions about these objects and sort of their larger meaning, or what I perceive as their larger meaning.
Yeah, and before we jump into that, I just want to add on. I just want to add that if this is meant to share Alex's stories, but also to inspire. If you watching this or reading the book start thinking about, what objects do I have that have stories in a similar way? What would I talk about given this prompt? Well, I'm officially giving you this prompt.
Yes.
If you use the QR code on the screen or go to that URL, it will take you to a form where you can submit in whatever file type you want an image and text. Or audio, video, whatever you want, as long as we get a visual of the object you are discussing and the histories that go along with it. And ultimately, we are going to turn this into a virtual gallery of our community's stories. So not only do these stories represent us or our personal groups, but also our collective. It will become an object itself of our collective stories.
It's very meta.
It's very meta.
Right.
I'm excited.
I'm very, very excited about this. So this is open to students, faculty, staff, alumni, right? Anybody who's a part of the larger HCCC community. So, so yeah. And if you've got questions, right, Sarah, you've got the chat window up. I think
I do have the chat window up. Yeah. Absolutely. I have the chat window up. So if you are logged into Twitch, you can send a message there. You can also see on the screen our Facebook and Instagram accounts. You can get in touch with us there, or you can email us. Or we're open. Come talk to us. We're open. It's slow in here. Come make it less slow.
Come pick up a copy of the Empress of Salt and Fortune.
That too.
There you go. All right. So do we want to get started?
Yes.
I'm gonna try and go from like the maybe I'm less involved in this history to the I'm more involved in this history. So we'll sort of start out small and then maybe build from there. And we'll see where this takes us. Okay. So are we ready?
Let's see. What is our first object?
It is a Kodak Instamatic. For those of you who are very young, you were probably like, sorry, cameras existed outside of my phone. They did. And not only did they exist outside your phone, but this is what they look like. So this is a true vintage camera, the Kodak Instamatic. You used to pull it, okay, to get the film to move. It is so old, it's stuck. There's actually no film roll in here, so it won't move. This was sort of your... this is how you would take a picture. Oh, there we go. There we go. You take a picture, move the film. Ancient. I think this is like would actually be considered like a classic art, right? The same way like leather working, right? Would be considered classic art. Exactly. So the reason that I brought this up is Kodak was originally called Kodak Eastman, right? So it was two people, people's last name who at the dawn of photography, they patented a very specific way of filmmaking, right? So being able to actually develop the film. It was a very painstaking process. I mean, there are some people who still develop film this way, but it was a very painstaking process. Involved lots of chemicals, lots of time, and it was a very expensive process. And so what Kodak Eastman did is they said, we want to make this available for the common man, right? So that everybody can essentially take pictures, snapshots, right? They were really the ones who kind of promoted this idea that like you should be taking pictures of life, right? It doesn't have to be, if you look at really old pictures from like the 1800s, right? Everybody's standing very still and there's no smiling, right? They look like they're almost painted. Kodak was really like, let's not do that. Let's have a little bit more fun. And so they pioneered lots of different types of film so that you could actually take pictures in different lights, people moving, you know, things like that. So I know it sounds wild, right? Because again, like our iPhones take like snapshots every, 10 seconds if we want to, but this was really revolutionary for kind of taking an art form and taking a technology that had been reserved for very wealthy people and giving it to everybody, right? Or at the very least, those people who had disposable funds to buy film, right? And to buy cameras. And so this is obviously a much, much later version of what they were talking about, but it's important to me for a couple of reasons. So my father is a photographer. That is his job. For as long as I have known, he has been taking pictures. He was an art director at a stock photography agency, which, if you want to talk about what that is, come and see me in the library and we'll get into it. But my whole life, I've been surrounded by picture taking, the art of photography, going on shoots with him. I have been in many ad campaigns. You might not even recognize it, but I've been in a lot of stock photography as a child. And so for him, right, Kodak Eastman was really important because his family growing up was very poor. He was the sixth child, so he was the youngest child in his family. And by the time he got to be in high school, his parents were like, we do not have any money to send you to college. You weren't smart enough to get a scholarship, so you're on your own, baby. And unfortunately, the brother who is directly above him. So my uncles were born kind of in pairs. And my one uncle, Michael, and my father were born very close to each other. And they were kind of always very good friends. Well, Michael was about a year older than my father, and he passed away of leukemia when he was 21. And he had a life insurance policy, and my dad got it. So my grandparents gave it to my father, and they said, you can do anything you want with this. And so he went to photography school in like 1979 or 1980. And his parents were like, I cannot believe this life choice that you have made for yourself. But he was really excited. And so for many years, he apprenticed, he worked under different people. He actually got to go to the Kodak Eastman facility up in Rochester, New York. So he saw the ins and outs of this technology, but also the art form. And so truly, like, photography has been a very important part of my life. And Kodak Eastman and Kodak have been very important parts of my life. And it was really funny. My mother-in-law was actually going through her house. She was moving to a smaller place a couple of years ago. And we used to always joke with her that, you know, she's a pack rat, right? She's a hoarder. She has all of these different things. And we were going through, and she was going to throw this out. And I said, Dorothy, I said, is there a camera in that box? And she goes, oh yeah. And I said, you were going to throw this out? And she goes, yeah, it doesn't, like, you can't do anything with it anymore. And I said, I know, but it's like a piece of history. And she was like, well, you can have it. So I took it. I showed it to my dad. He got a real kick out of it, but he's a little bit more like, he's one of these guys who's like, out with the old, in with the new. So he's like, you know, I have a digital one of these, right? And I was like, well, you're a professional. I'm just an archivist. So this was my first entry. If you're interested in the history of photography, I will talk to you forever about it. But, you know, I think it's really important that we can look at something like this and think, you know, 30, almost 40 years ago, you know, when somebody bought this brand new and was using it on a family vacation, that, you know, photography can touch you in very big ways, but it can also touch you in very personal and intimate ways. And I think nothing says that better than having, you know, a picture, right, of a vacation you went on or a good friend of yours that moved away. So this is my reminder, my old lady reminder, that you should print your digital pictures so that you have them forever. All right. So I'll put that up. I will put that one away.
That's really great.
Sarah.
Well, thank you, obviously, for participating in this.
Did you ever use one of these?
I had, not that in particular, but I did have a film camera when I was young. Yes, a non-disposable film camera.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
It was,
what was it? Was it like a Sony or something?
I don't know. It was like a kid's first camera. It was green. That's what I remember.
Green?
It was green.
Very nice.
It was green.
What synchronicity? Yeah.
So you found this when your mother-in-law was learning. So does that mean that there's hope for everybody's old electronics now? You
know, I wish I could say, well, you know what, I don't have it here, but there might be. You know, I've always thought, like, you know, there should be like a museum to like outdated technology, right? I think there was like an exhibit not that long ago, maybe a couple years ago in Silicon Valley of like outdated technology. And I thought to myself, like, let's make this a full-on museum. Like, outdated technology is wild. In a couple of years, we're going to see like ring lights, you know, in these types of museums, right? Because they're right, because we're going to have invented something bigger and better. So yeah, I don't know, hold on to the really weird stuff, right? The stuff that's kind of like iconic looking, right? Because like I said, like, this is also just like an interesting like piece of art to have in your, you know, house. I have it like on one of my bookcases, you know, because it's so colorful and fun looking.
Yeah. We have a comment from Eric. He says, first, that the way that you were describing how old photographs were taken, staying very serious and not still and not moving, he says he still takes photographs that way.
Really? Is this you, Eric?
But he also has a really interesting comment that he felt that it used to be more rare to get a picture you felt was worth keeping because you had to understand the light and the angles instead of just seeing the results on your phone screen first. And I think that's a really interesting point to bring up. I think that is really interesting that you have to be more skilled. You have to really know what you're doing, like you said. And it takes longer to get to that point, I think. It would take more time to get to that point because there's no instant feedback. That's a really interesting point.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think that, we really do take for granted if you open up your like photo app right now, right? And you're just going to see grids of like the same picture, right? Because you like didn't find the one you didn't delete the everything else except for the one that you want to keep, right? Because we just have this feeling that like, I'm just going to take a million of them. I'll look at them later and I'll figure out the one I want to keep. Right.
And that's hundreds of pictures of my dog on my phone. No, actually, that's because I do the same thing. Winner, but everyone is great.
everyone is a piece of art.
Every single picture of him is great.
But there is this feeling, right, that we know right away whether something is usable, right? Whereas like it used to be that you would look at the sun. If the sun was in a bad place, you had to wait a couple hours for the sun to move. And if it was raining, that was going to be a whole different thing. And, every little thing kind of is going to affect the ultimate picture. And it used to be very difficult to take pictures. You had to like do math almost. Like you had to know how fast the shutter speed was going to be and what type of picture you were taking. And I heard this term f-stop my whole life, but I don't actually know what it means. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, no, thanks, Eric. Absolutely. So do we want to do maybe one more? I don't know.
Sure.
What do you think?
What else do you have for us?
Well, I have a couple of things. So I have one kind of really quick thing that's right next to me. That's very old. It's literally falling apart as I'm touching it, which is kind of gnarly. So this is a Maxwell House coffee can. Does anyone know where Maxwell House used to be based? Anybody in the chat know where Maxwell House?
I don't.
You don't know?
I don't know, and I don't see anybody jumping in on chat.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
Are you going to tell me that it's in Jersey City?
I don't know if you'll be able to see this, if it will be too distorted, but it does in fact say Hoboken, New Jersey.
Very cool.
So, where there are now beautiful $1 million condos on the Hoboken waterfront, an area called Maxwell Place, which might give you some hint as to what was there before. That used to be the old warehouses for the sort of like the raw materials, if you will, right? The coffee beans coming in, and they would be, refined and packed up into these pretty, little cans, right? And sort of shipped out all over the United States. And actually there used to be a bar in Hoboken called Maxwell's. So if you are of certain age, maybe you went to go see a show there, and maybe you got a burger and fries afterwards. But it was one of the only places you could see live music in the area for quite a long time for various different reasons. We live in Hudson County. I'm sure we can figure out what some of those reasons were. But it had started originally, so way back, 30s, 40s. It had started as the bar restaurant that the factory workers who worked at the Maxwell House Coffee Company would go to on the shift change. So they were open 24 hours. You could go and you could get a coffee and a hot, and a buttered roll, right? The New Jersey classic breakfast. Or you could get a beer before going home I'm sure you could also get a beer at 7 o'clock in the morning if you wanted to as well. So it didn't have a name. It was just called Maxwell, sort of colloquially, meaning that most of their patrons, right, were coming from these warehouses that were out there on the waterfront. So over the years, right, the bar remained open. It had a couple of identity changes, but it remained called Maxwell's. And I moved to Hoboken in 2010 because I had a job in New York City. And I had a boyfriend at the time who's now my husband. And his name is Dan Maxwell. And it always gave us like, we were always very tickled by this idea that there was this legendary bar in Hoboken that had a very cool music scene. And his name happened to be Maxwell. A couple of years after living in Hoboken, he ended up getting a job as a bartender there. And it always made the patrons laugh because they were like, "Do you own this place?" And he was like, "No, not at all. It has nothing to do. My last name has nothing to do with this place." But I bought this right before we got married at a flea market that was not in New Jersey. It was like out in, I don't even know, Pennsylvania or Massachusetts or something like that. And I saw this and I was like, "Oh, this is so cute." And so we actually used this as part of our wedding decor because we are the Maxwells. And we happen to live in Hoboken for a very long time. So that's my little piece of Americana, very localized Americana, if you will.
That's so funny. Very cute.
Yes. I actually found in Tennessee, so now my whole thing has been kind of trying to collect things from Maxwell House, and I found in Tennessee this really cute tin, like a tin tray, like that you would have served like tea or coffee on, and it's a Maxwell House one. So
very nice. I like how that kind of brings everything together for you. Very nice.
In a nice. Well, I have one more thing that will really put a bow on sort of understanding me.
Okay.
And where I've decided to insert myself into history. So I'm going to move my microphone a little bit because it's actually behind me. It was too big to hold in my hands. I'm going to angle my camera down. So hopefully you guys can see what is here. It's not the plant, although the plant, that is its permanent home. But it's this lovely thing right here. Sarah, can you tell me what this is?
Is that a card catalog?
It is a card catalog, but it's a very odd card catalog. It's very big, right? So the drawers are actually about double the size of a typical library card catalog. So these would have held even larger mark records than the ones that we sort of are used to seeing like in like a school library. So for those of you who don't know, I think most people who are watching probably went to college or were in high school when they were probably still using card catalogs. But they were these big chest of drawers, right? And they had these cute little drawers that you would pull out. They look like this, right? You'd actually pull them on this little thing right here. And you'd actually have to look for a book, right, using this card catalog. Now we have like a nice electronic catalog where you can literally type in like dog and, you know, thousands of things will come up for you. But here you had to actually know the title of the book or the name of the author, and all of these would have a little plate on it, right? And they would sort of go by according to the alphabet. And it would either be by title, right, or by author, sometimes by subject. But there was an actual company who sort of made these originally for lots of libraries throughout the United States. And this it has a very interesting story. This was actually a sample that like a salesman from this company would bring with him to different libraries and be like, "Look at this fancy new, wood stain that we have, and these pretty brass poles that we have." And so he would leave it, you know, with I'm sure the, head librarian or whoever, and, be like, it has actually printed on the back of the drawers here, the information to get in touch with the sales team if you wanted to order like a full one of these. So it actually holds my like my greeting cards and like my extra thumbtacks and things like that. So it now holds office storage because they're actually pretty nice big drawers. But I saw this again at a flea market, and I was like, that's a little weird looking. It's not exactly a card, like it's not exactly the card catalog that I was imagining. But it was still made by the same company that has made a lot of them. And this one is actually from 1921. That's what's printed on the inside of this one. So it's pretty old. And it's very beautiful. Again, it would have been like a really expensive piece of furniture for the library to buy. Like you can tell, it's really pretty wood. It's very thick. This is still like the original varnish that was on it. And I have put a plant on top of it. Clearly, I care very much about the integrity of this piece. But obviously, I'm a librarian. Sarah is a librarian. I saw this and I could not resist. I absolutely had to have a little piece of library history in my home. But one thing I wanted to mention about the card catalog, I was talking to my husband about this when I was coming up with lists of things that I wanted to show you guys. And you know, in most public libraries, the system of organization that is used is the Dewey Decimal System, which everybody hears that. You hear it in school. You giggle about it because Dewey is a silly name, and it is. And the man who created the Dewey Decimal System, and I truly use the word created loosely here. He's often credited when lots of other people helped him as well. He was not a great guy, and it's important to know. I have my
quibbles with the Dewey Decimal System.
Yes, as you should. And it's important to bring up, he was not a great guy in his personal life, but he was also a racist and xenophobic, and his classification system reflects that still to this day. And he's not the only classification system. Library of Congress's classification system is also extremely problematic, as well as the many other classification systems that libraries and museums and other cultural heritage sites use to organize things. And, you know, I think it's really important that we confront these things in our lives that are problematic. I have a friend who many, many years ago got a tattoo of the Dewey Decimal number for, I think it was for fiction. And, you know, years later, sort of re-educating herself was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this, right? But, you know, it's, I think it's just an important thing to know and to confront when we see it and to try and change it. And so there's lots of librarians. Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and you can finish your, if you had another.
I'm not a cataloger, so.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you, I might be reading into this, but I think that's a really great connection, intended or not, to the, to our book, to our read, The Empress of Salt and Fiction. That I think that.
Picking it up.
I may have read it. I think that's a really, I think that there's a connection there with the untold histories and the untold stories that within every cataloging system, every classification system, there are just as many stories that are told as stories there are as untold. Same with any official history, which is something that is, as you said, confronted in the book. That's a really nice parallel there. That's really compelling, I think. Parallel to look at. That it's not just that the histories, if we're going to have a conversation about how history is this thing that does have these kind of untold hidden voices, that we are sure to make room in our definition of history for really not just what you find in a history textbook, but also things like a classification system that necessarily is biased because it has to come from somebody's perspective. and which
Yes.
perspective, which point of view is it privileging?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, I often think about, well, I think about a lot of things. One thing that I think about a lot. So the reason that Dewey, you know, created his system, right, is because he was kind of annoyed with the Library of Congress system. And the Library of Congress system always makes me laugh because it was based on, at least partially, right, sort of originated from Thomas Jefferson's library collection, right? That's sort of the, I don't know, that's sort of the PR story, right, that they like to tell. So it's like, if you look at it, there's like agriculture, like it goes deep into agriculture, deep into military history, like naval history has its own classification, but like, I don't know, like there's like one little space for like, you know, literature. So it's like, you know, and obviously, you know, they've modernized it and they've updated and they've added things to the Library of Congress. But, you know, Dewey always felt like it was something that, you know, it needs to be completely, you know, sort of built from the ground up. And yet he put his own biases right into his classification system. And, you know, again, he's not here to and he's not here to defend himself or try to explain it, but it's like, you know, he's a product of where he lived and the time that he lived in, and you know, and sort of what people found acceptable, right, and that they wouldn't sort of push up against. And, you know, history, I have students that I teach at Rutgers, and I teach in an information course, and they are undergraduates, and often many of them are freshmen, and they write a particular paper every semester, and in it they always inevitably they always say history, right, or the New York Times, or you know, this expert on something is not biased, and that's why I'm including them as a good source of information. And I always underline the word unbiased, not biased, lacking bias, right? Whatever way they've decided to sort of convey to me that this person is without bias. I have to highlight it and point out and say, I understand what you're trying to say, which is that this person has, we hope, right, sort of examined all the facts and is presenting them to us in a way that is very straightforward, or at least that's what we would like to believe. But the fact of the matter is, no one is unbiased, right? Everyone brings something with them, right? If we look at the story, right, of the Empress of Salt and Fortune, which, you know, not to give anything away, right, but this Empress wants to convey a very particular story, that she is powerful, that she is the sort of correct person to be leading the country, and that this right somehow came to her, right, and that she's going to sort of highlight these reasons that she's able to do this. But it's a very constructed narrative that she's creating. It's not false, right? There's not, you know, there's nothing necessarily false in what she's saying, but there is this construction, right, that is kind of obscured. And if anybody maybe knew how it was actually maybe came about, there would be a lot more maybe people fighting with her, right, or arguing that she maybe wasn't legitimate. And that's what we have to sort of think about a lot of history, right, is that there are things that you know, don't necessarily need to be questioned in that same way. I'm not suggesting that, but nobody is bringing a completely unbiased presentation to history. There's a reason why we even tell the stories. I mean, you could say to me, why did you pick a camera, a coffee can, and some library drawers instead of, like, I don't know, your crystals and your, you know, and your ghosts and your horror movies, right? I kept them aside because, you know, there's a very particular story that I was trying to tell here that Sarah picked up on, right? Which was that, you know, we need to be very cognizant of who is writing history and what audience, right, that we're, you know, that who's reading that history. So, you know, I think in exploring your own history too, that's the other thing. Exploring your own history shows that we are all like, we are all worth the discussion, right? And we are all worth sort of examining how we've been affected by these seismic things that have sort of happened around us, that we have maybe not had any control over, but we've been changed by them, right? Or we've interacted with them. And, you know, when we talk about political, dynasties and things like that, which is examined in the book, you know, those are rife with, you know, seismic changes happening, but it's very small things that did it. And I think that that's what's really interesting. It's very mundane, you know, small, a map, a dress, a piece of jewelry, a letter, right? These small things that by themselves don't mean anything, but we imbue them with such a sense of meaning and personal meaning. What does it mean to me, and what am I going to do with that bit of information? And sometimes it just changes your worldview, and sometimes it changes history, right?
Very well said.
Maybe. I don't know. I think I blacked out in the middle somewhere.
Well, your point was made.
I'm kidding.
Your point was made regardless.
Thank you, Sarah.
that we all you mentioned that we all have something that's worth looking at, and I think that that's very true, and I believe that we're all, not just do we all have something worth saying, but we all owe it to ourselves to figure out what that is. That this exercise of examining your own history through objects isn't just an exercise of what possessions do I have, how can I catalog my personal possessions, so to speak, but what they really mean to you, not in a spring cleaning, does this spark joy kind of way, although there is value to that as well. But what does this mean to you implies what is significant to you. To be able to identify if an object is significant to you, you have to know what is significant to you. And I think that's a valuable experience, a valuable thought experiment, maybe, to go through, to really kind of identify, well, what objects would I talk about? What sums up my personal or group histories? Why am I picking those? Why am I picking those instead of other objects, like you said? Not just are there other people's histories involved in that choice, but for your own sake, what is it that you are valuing?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's not what's valued by larger society. I can't help but think of the first item, you know, in the book, right, is that beautiful sealskin. I forget if it was a dress or an overcoat, but you know, it was, you know, something that was apparently very out of fashion, not very cool for this young empress, you know, to be wearing. You know, she sort of made quite an impression on the court. She was immediately labeled like a foreigner and an outsider. And yet, you know, in the years since, when it's sort of stumbled upon in a closet, it is talked about with such reverence, right? And it's described in such detail, you know, down to, you know, the threading and the specific beads that are used in it, you know, and again, it's one of these things where where knowing who wore it, right, and knowing who what that person ended up doing, you know, regardless of how they were originally treated, is incredible, right? And it's one of those things, right, where sometimes you look at like a vintage item, and you think to yourself, somebody tells you like, oh, that was really worthless, like back in the day, or, you know, that was essentially like would have been thrown into the garbage if somebody didn't save it or whatever. And it's like, what? I can't believe that. It's so beautiful. Like, you know, it's made so beautifully and it's so beautifully designed. And it's like, yeah, but in the moment, right, it wasn't appreciated in the way that later generations have imbued it with some kind of meaning.
Right, because things can change meaning. Meaning can change even if the object doesn't. That object started, that dress in the story started with two different meanings, at least. What it meant to the court and what it meant to her as something that originated with her people and her people's culture, and her family's personal history went into it. Right, so it started with two meanings, and by the time we hear about it at the beginning of the book, it's gained at least a third meaning, right? Things can change meaning. The Dewey Decimal System started as a newer alternative, a newer, better alternative, and now we're looking at it going, oh, this also has problems. Things change meaning, or the meaning attached to things changes, even if that thing itself doesn't change. Like words can change, can have meanings that change as well. That is also part of this exploration, is not just a dimension, not just the connections, but the connections over time. Some of the objects that you might think about, I know something that I was personally thinking about when I was thinking, oh, what would I talk about for this, is something that I got when I was 12. It was disappointing. It was a gift. It was a gift. It was a suitcase. I was 12. I said, what am I going to do with this? But now it was the first thing that I thought of as what is a meaningful, an object to me that is every day, but also connected to all these different parts of my own personal and group histories and stories and identities, right? That time is an important factor in this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, Sarah, don't tell them what it was. Maybe we'll explore it a little bit more.
I'll elaborate if you'd like me to at a later date.
Oh, okay, all right. Great. Yes, I want to hear some of those stories behind it. Now, I can't tell. Was there someone yodeling behind you, Sarah? Or what? Did you hear?
There was
or is that some sort of feedback?
No, there's nobody yodeling. There were a couple people in the library.
I heard like a yell. Okay.
That might just been feedback.
It sounded like something like, also, oh, maybe it was feedback.
But it might have been feedback.
I thought I heard like one
before I started this. So.
Well, you know, you live and you learn, and then you get loves, right? So
Eric is adding in a couple of things. One, Eric might have preferred that you did talk about the ghosts, because apparently Haunted Coffee Pot was on his bingo list.
Haunted Coffee Pot.
Haunted Coffee Maker, and what was it? Haunted Coffee Maker was on there, and your coffee can is kind of, I'll give you credit for it, Eric.
I think you get credit for it because, I mean, what do you mean by haunted? Like, there's generations of men and women who packed coffee into these cans, and I'm standing on the very soil that they also stood on. Right? I mean, there's some haunting there. It's a very haunting image.
Yeah, we also he also brings up the point of art, that this is a really good point too, that for example, the Mona Lisa, that it was praised in its time as powerful, and now we have so many, our understanding of it is influenced by what it originated as, and through the years, how that is developed. Yeah, art is a great example of these things that can start as one thing and continue as on in the same vein, or change meaning, or gain things as it goes along, like a snowball rolling down a hill. that some things just kind of gain more significance. Like it starts out, that's very nice, but also the Mona Lisa is now a touchstone. It's the first thing many people do when they think of, you go to the Louvre, okay, well, we have to see the Mona Lisa. That it's not just the picture itself, it's everything that goes into that and what it has come to mean to surrounding culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say something, but I don't remember the entire context, so I feel like I shouldn't. But there was a discussion once about trying to insure the Mona Lisa, right? Like insure it for some amount of money, and essentially it's priceless, right? Like that's essentially what the I don't know what you call them, adjusters, I don't know, like people at insurance companies, they were essentially saying like, it is priceless. Like if we put a price to it, it's going to be an arbitrary number, no matter how high it is, because to lose something like the Mona Lisa would be detrimental, right? Like humanity would have forfeit something, innate, right? Intangible that we can't talk about. And it's interesting, right? Because, it's old, don't get me wrong. I mean, like it was made, it's a Renaissance painting. It was painted by someone who is arguably considered a genius, and someone, Leonardo Da Vinci is considered truly the embodiment of the Renaissance man. He was a mathematician. He was an engineer. He was an artist. He was a diplomat, right? He was a politician. He was many different things, but he was still a guy in Western Europe, right? So to sort of have these conversations, right, where we talk about the pricelessness of the Mona Lisa and everything that's sort of imbued into the Mona Lisa, you can't help but think again, like, right, but what else is out there that is sort of akin to the Mona Lisa that we don't even know about, right? That's not necessarily the same touch point, but perhaps has the same cultural relevance, or I would even argue human relevance, right? Yeah.
And what could have that relevance if it had started with that privileged position of being voiced and being noticed.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, right? Because Leonardo da Vinci was praised in his day, but then you have people like, Vincent Van Gogh. I'm not going to say Van Gogh because I am not Dutch, so Vincent Van Gogh, right? Where, now his paintings are incredibly valuable, but I mean, the poor guy, could never catch a break in his life. Right. So it's interesting. Yeah. It's so interesting how things change and how the people behind it somehow pushed it along or held it back or purposely, did something, it's an endless conversation that I think is really fascinating. And I think it's what underpins this whole conversation is there are things in everyone's life that can be discussed like this, right? And can be worthy of discussion and exploration and self-reflection, frankly. Everybody's story is important, even if it's not the one in the official, history.
And in that vein, I would like to promote once again, we want to hear those stories. We want to hear those stories. We want to see those objects. We want to know, what are those histories in your own home. So once again, on the screen, there is a URL and a QR code that will lead to a form where you can tell us your stories. Submit a picture or a document, a video if you'd like. Tell us your story, show us your object. We would really like to know. Eric is asking, when is the deadline for these things to be submitted? Which is an excellent question.
Great question. Great question. I kind of left it sort of purposely a little vague because I don't see why we necessarily have to stop submitting. Here's what I'll say, Eric, and anybody else who's interested, and anybody who you decide to share this information with. Wink, wink, wink to my faculty members out there. We'd like to have something to unveil in September, right? We'd like to put a little capstone onto this project and kind of say, you know, here is, you know, I think we're gonna, you know, you do sort of like a digital gallery, right, where people will be able to come and see these things. So we'd love to have sort of something, you know, in you know, by September that we can kind of show what people are saying. But I don't necessarily think that we want to close it anytime soon, because it's a really interesting you know, engagement. Maybe, I mean, maybe we'll close it at the end of the year or something like that, and sort of say, you know, this is a snapshot of 2021, people sort of reflecting. But yeah, we don't have a hard deadline on purpose. But you know, if you want to give your students a hard deadline,
yeah, so
we're okay with that.
Submit your own for us for September and then do it with your students in the fall. That totally works.
That totally works. I think we made this sort of vague and open-ended enough, right? That, you know, you can explore lots of different particular, you know, lots of different tracks, I think, even within this discussion of, you know, objects as history, right? And objects as extensions of personal histories and things like that. So yeah. Sarah, can people be anonymous when they submit, if they want to be?
It asks for a name and an email address. The form asks for a name and an email address in its current incarnation. Okay. There's nothing verifying that name. So if you wanted to put in anonymous, you theoretically can. There is an email address that gets attached to it, but that is not going to be part of the gallery. The email address is just in case we need to follow up to make sure that we're getting your story straight. Say something is wrong with the file upload and it only uploads maybe an image but not the story attached to it, or vice versa. I wanted to make sure that we had contact information so we could say, hey, we want your whole story. Can you send us the rest of it? So email addresses are required by the form, but they're not going to be used for anything other than follow-ups if necessary.
Great. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, I am all shared out for today. So maybe this is a good place to stop and say goodbye to everybody. I'll do one more pitch. So if any of this was intriguing to you, if you heard us talking about the story, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, and that was of interest, we have copies both at North Hudson as well as the Journal Square library locations. So come pick it up. They're free. So you can keep it, and it's very fun. It's short, and we're going to be doing a couple of other events around it.
We have a couple more one-on-one interviews like this lined up, and then we have some more book club-like conversations where people can drop in, really dig deep into the book and the themes and points that they noticed, or maybe points that they didn't. They're not quite sure that they got. What did you think about it? Right? So we have a couple of those lined up too. You can find all of these events on the library's event calendar. If you want, you can see all of our events for the summer and fall semesters, but also you can filter that calendar to look for just Book in Common events.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye. Thank you so much.
We hope to see more stories. And you.
Yes, please.
Come visit us.
Please. Right. We miss you.
We do. We miss you. Bye.